So, when we're talking about cultures, other cultures, and we're talking about near death experiences, I guess in essence, what you're saying is that, Andrew, is that your near death experience is going to be affected by the culture you were raised in. Is that the case?
I will say this, near-death experiences are tailored to the individual. Each one is unique. What you see is going to be completely colored by your personal beliefs, the, not just in your group as far as your culture or your religion, things like that. Like I was brought up going to church, but I never felt at home there. So I had my own set of beliefs as far as, the way things should be. And I didn't feel like church fit that. And so when I had my experiences, they were more metaphysical. They were not religious in that respect. So every experience is always tailored to the individual, not they don't say, well, you're Christian, so you get the Christian experience. They say, who are you as a being? Who are you as an individual being? And let's tailor your experience to fit that so that you understand things, because if you're, let's say, if you're religious and you have a scientific experience, you're not going to automatically accept that you're dead or that you're on the other side
You
because
have
you've
to
been
have
taught
proof.
things are going to be different. Yeah. Well, so you're like when you're in certain religions, you're taught things are going to be a certain way. And if they're a completely different way, your brain automatically pushes back against that. Your brain, your mind, or what your consciousness pushes back against that for a while until you get used to being on the other side. So the whole idea is they don't want you to push back automatically. They want you to open up and understand that not only that you're dead, you're on the other side, that you're okay, that yeah, and once you're acclimated to the other side and start to see the way things really are, then you don't need those constructs anymore that we need when we're human.
Switching to our next topic, which is more about connection and oneness. Do NDEs consistently point to the idea that we are all connected?
Ned, do you want to go first or do you want me to?
Well, I'll just add that almost every experiencer they come back uh, saying two things, that it's all about love and that we're all in this together. No matter our belief, religion, our country, our economic status, our any other label, it's like all those are human labels. We are all uh, we're souls in human bodies, and we're all basically the same inside.
And that is basically true. And the best way to think about it, like I explained earlier, if you think of the cells in your body being as part of you, like we are part of Source or God or whatever you choose to call that being. Um, we are trying to get out of this with this. I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought for a second.
Well, we're talking
Um,
about connection, being
uh,
connected.
Thank you. So yes, we're all connected because we're all part of the same being. So we experience things like separation and individuality when we're in the body, but it's because we're what they call lower evolution species. On a scale of 1 to 100, if you want to put all species in the universe on that scale, we're like a 20 on that. Where the higher up you are on that scale, the more you understand, the more connected you are to other beings, not only in your own species, but others. the more connected you are to the other side, even while in the body, and then eventually you don't even require a body to exist in this universe. So there's that hierarchy, evolution that we go through as beings that go from, us being barely out of the caves to us being as close to as close to source as we can get. And but the one thing is to understand we're all part of that being. This being created all of us to experience its creation through us. And so we are connected because we're all part of the same being, just like the cells in our body are connected because they're all part of us. So to imagine ourselves as separate, yes, there are individual cells, but they're all part of the same body. In the same way, we're part of that same being. So we're always connected. And once we get past, uh, that's the one thing that has to change about humanity, and beyond everything else is our mindset, how we see things, how we see ourselves, how we see each other, how we see the universe. And it's the difference between seeing everything as separate and individual, uh, to seeing everything as connected and interconnected and all as one. And once you shift your consciousness from one to the other, it changes the way you not only see everything, but do everything. Because when you realize that everything that you say and do affects every other being around you, you can't just act where it's like, what's in it for me? You can't just think about yourself anymore. You have to think about how this is going to affect others. If I do this and it harms a lot of people, can I do this knowing what I know now? Like I know I'm connected to other beings. I cannot act in a way that intentionally harms others because I know that that harm affects more than just myself now. I know it's not just me. So it's the difference of how we see ourselves.
So these differences that we refer to, do they also exist the same or differently in cultures around the world?
By what do you mean by that exactly?
Well, so this feeling, some of us sense a connection, some of us don't. We're born, and because of our environment, when we're born, we hear from the very beginning that we are separate and
Mm-hmm.
everyone else happens to be the other. And then we sort of manifest whatever that will cause later or throughout that individual's life. But there to a certain extent, I think some of us sense that connection. And my question is, do cultures interpret that connection differently? For example, say indigenous people here in the United States. Every single indigenous person that I've talked to, regardless of the tribe that they belong to, talk about the connection that they have with Mother Earth, that there's no separation. And the decisions we make or the way we treat Earth is in effect treating ourselves.
Yeah, there are some cultures that will um, encourage the beings within it to see things as connected and to experience things differently. So yes, culture has very much an impact on the way we see things and the way we do things. Now we can, as an individual being, choose to learn and live differently, like I did when I came back from my near-death experience. That allowed me to see things in a different way that I hadn't experienced before. But some people can do that through culture. Some people can do that through their own efforts. It depends, but we all have that potential to see things as connected. Whether we do or not depends on our individual experiences, our own lives, like what culture we're in, our belief system, the people around us, whether we've experienced the other side or not. There's a thousand things that could go into that.
So when we're talking about cultures, other cultures, and we're talking about near-death experiences, I guess in essence, what you're saying is that, Andrew, is that your near-death experience is going to be affected by the culture you were raised in. Is that the case?
I will say this: near-death experiences are tailored to the individual. Each one is unique. What you see is going to be completely colored by your personal beliefs, the not just in your group as far as your culture or your religion, things like that. Like I was brought up going to church, but I never felt at home there. So I had my own set of beliefs as far as, the way things should be. And I didn't feel like church fit that. And so when I had my experiences, they were more metaphysical. They were not religious in that respect. So every experience is always tailored to the individual. Not They don't say, "Well, you're Christian, so you get the Christian experience." They say, "Who are you as a being? Who are you as an individual being?" And let's tailor your experience to fit that, so that you understand things. Because let's say, if you're religious and you have a scientific experience, you're not going to automatically accept that you're dead or that you're on the other side,
You
because
have
you've
to
been
have
taught
proof.
things are going to be different. Yeah. Well, so you're like, when you're in certain religions, you're taught things are going to be a certain way. And if they're a completely different way, your brain automatically pushes back against that. Your brain, your mind, or what your consciousness pushes back against that for a while, until you get used to being on the other side. So the whole idea is they don't want you to push back automatically. They want you to open up and understand that not only that you're dead, you're on the other side, that you're okay, that yeah, and once you're acclimated to the other side and start to see the way things really are, then you don't need those constructs anymore that we need when we're human. Like religion is like, I don't know, Ned kind of touched on this a little bit, or I meant to expand on it. There's no religion on the other side.
Well, because religion is a man-made concept.
Exactly. Man-made constructs don't exist on the other side. They don't need to. They're only temporary things that we use as humans to try to understand our little universe, our part in the universe. Like, um, religion was originally created as a way for us to try to answer the questions we couldn't answer in other ways. What happens to us when we die? Who are we? Where do we come from?
Well, and
Things like
also
that.
there's an element of control there too. That
Well,
was
that's
also,
how it became. But originally, there was religion was originally designed to be a way to bring people together to answer those questions that they couldn't answer for themselves. And unfortunately, it got perverted into what it's become.
into, yeah. Ned, what does your research show in terms of people's their overall experience with their NDE based on their culture or their religious background?
As Andrew said, the NDE experience is tailored for the person, and so there is oftentimes, I've seen a lot of people who comment who don't know better, but it's a common belief out there, even in the NDE group, and they say that a person's will basically see and experience what they expect, and I would say most NDEs completely surprise the person, including Andrews and including a lot of people. It isn't, atheists will sometimes even meet Jesus or other beings, or Christians will have a completely non-religious experience and only meet their uncle. It's more based on, it seems like, what the person needs, and what will comfort them or teach them, uh, what it is they need to know. And there are so many types of NDEs. There are the brief ones, like a person's in the hospital in the OR, and they float above their body, observe what's going on, and then it's over. And then they're back. Or ones that start out like that, and then they're out in a whole nother dimension and have, and meet guides and uh, God even, and have conversations and have learnings. Like in Andrew's case, he said it was like 10 years of experience. And so in all of these, it's about what the person needs, and one of the biggest distinctions between an OBE, which is just an out of body experience, and an NDE is OBEs are often self uh, limited. uh, Meaning, if a person is practicing and then they have an OBE, and they hover over their body, and then they return. It's all, it's kind of their own doing usually. But an NDE usually involves higher intelligence who's like orchestrating and guiding and kind of in control of most or all of the experience.
So to your point, Ned, I had a OBE when I had surgery a year ago. I actually asked for an NDE. I really wanted one. And doggone it, when I came out of anesthesia, I'm like, darn it, I didn't have an NDE and I really wanted to have one.
Well, and it's probably because you didn't need one.
Well, okay, so there's that, right? That's a whole nother story. But so this is what happened. I went under hypnosis about 6 or 7 months after the surgery. And the hypnosis session helped me understand that I had an OBE that I didn't remember. I had wiped it for some reason. And I saw myself hovering over, like you hear, even NDEers have. I'm hovering over the surgical process. I'm hearing what everybody's doing. I even could see the head surgeon measuring the part they were going to put on my heart. They were going to add to my heart. I actually saw them like, oh, no, she needs this, she needs that. Then I was like, well, bye, I'm out of here. And I went to the other side, what I thought was the other side, and my son, who passed away in 2005. He was 9.5. He greeted me in his 9.5 little ethereal body. And he grabbed me by the hand and he started taking me and around like as a little tour, and he showed me the Akashic records, of which I had seen before. And eventually the rest of my earthly family that's passed joined me. And then I just sort of went off and did my thing, but it was always with the understanding that, don't get too comfortable because you got to go back. And I was like, no, I knew this wasn't a death experience. I knew what was happening. And so I did. I went back to my body. And then when I came to from the anesthesia, I didn't remember any of that. But when I went through the hypnosis experience, I could see everything that happened. So I probably created that because I really wanted a validation of some sort. I don't know, as a human being, as a 3D'er, I'm not sure. But that was pretty fascinating to me. And but what you said, Ned, I think is really telling, that I think there are ways to tell the differences between an NDE and just an OBE, because there are people that practice OBEs. That's what they want to do. That's how they travel. And I think it has a great deal to do with astral travel as well, which I have done in my dreams. I have gone forward, backwards, all kinds of places in those. Anything more we want to say about that, or are we ready to move on to AI?
Just two quick points. One to expand on something Ned said, and something to expand on what you said. One, when we talk about with people who what kind of experiences they have when they come back, one thing that you'll see a lot with people um, in when they come back from near-death experience is they no longer identify as what they used to be. They don't identify as atheists. They don't identify as Christian. They don't. And some do, and some change identities. But the vast majority of people who have near-death experiences, including myself, come back as what we call spiritual, not religious, not atheist, not anything else, spiritual. And the reason that, and why I say that is because spirituality is a personal journey. It's not like religion is more of a group think kind of thing. It's about, adhering to rote stuff and, everybody believing the same thing. Whereas spirituality is more of, I'm trying to better myself as a being and make the world a better place by making myself a better being. So that's number one. And number two, you mentioned when, like people seeing people in a certain guise, if you will. And that's because we have what's called a residual self image. And that's the image of the perfected image of ourselves in a certain lifetime. And it can be the last lifetime, it could be any lifetime. But most of the time, when you have a near death experience or an out of body experience, something like that, if you encounter people that you knew in this lifetime, you're going to see them as a perfected version of the being that you remember. They're not like if they were sick, they're not sick anymore. If they were paralyzed, disabled, if they had a brain tumor, none of that applies anymore. They're healthy, they're upright, they're perfect in every way. And what it is, but you'll recognize the visage, if you will, as them. You'll recognize it as a person that you knew, and that's part of making you comfortable on the other side, and part of having you accept where you are is the familiarity with the people and the things that you knew in the body, so that you accept where you are
Right.
more readily.
That makes sense. That absolutely makes sense.
Like my guide, he always appears to me. Now he could have, we all have a energy based form that's just blob of energy, but we recognize each other because of each individual's energy signature. But he
Yeah, I
appears to
heard
me
it's
in
a
his
vibratory thing.
yeah. It's a vibration, but it's more like it's we can feel it, we can sense it. It's an overall thing. It affects all. You don't just feel it. You sense it. You hear it. You see it, and everything. You just know that this being is this being, and not that being over there or this being over there. And but I will say, like for instance, my guide. Whenever I see him on the other side, always appears to me as the residual self-image of himself from his last incarnation, planet from the other side of the galaxy. He was not human, but I've always loved the way his species looks. I think they're incredibly beautiful beings. Um, like his inner the light from his energy based being shines through because most of their torso is translucent. The voices are very sing-songy. They sound like a mix of someone speaking a romantic language mixed with someone singing at the same time. And so he knows this about me. And so whenever he appears to me, he doesn't appear as his energy-based self or some other being he became in a previous lifetime. He appears as that specific um, residual self-image because he knows I like it.
Did you
So,
Andrew,
go ahead,
oh,
Ned?
go ahead.
well, And so I hear people who talk about, the Pleiadians, Arcturians, all that. And so, do you know
I was going
which
to ask the exact
system?
same question.
Which one?
What planet did your guide reveal
Is
where
he
he's
from?
from?
Yeah.
I know he's from a planet on the other side of the galaxy. Exactly, I know the specific area, if you will, not really specifically like exactly which star system it's from. I know that his species in that lifetime came from a different star system elsewhere. The I met two species while I was in my second near death experience that came from a different star system and were going elsewhere. One had settled, his species settled in a different star system. The other one was still exploring the galaxy, but one came from a planet that was almost wiped out by what's called a gamma ray burst, or GRB, from the formation of a black hole in a nearby system. The other one was wiped out by their star going supernova. So both of them had some foreknowledge of this event happening, and were able to get the majority or all of their species off planet before they were wiped out. Um, and they at least had the ability to get off planet, which we don't have that ability, obviously. Um, but anyway, so I know the general area where his planet is. I know we can't see it from Earth because of all the gas and dust and the light from all the stars that are in the core of the galaxy. We just don't have the ability with our current technology to see that area of the galaxy yet. Um, and I also know two of the three planets that I've lived on in previous incarnations that are in the Milky Way as well. So I know where two of those three are. So, you know,
When you talk to your guide, has your guide indicated the timing of this disclosure that we were being told is about to happen? I think some people say we're already in it, but the ETs that are surrounding us have quite a cloaking device on their spaceships, etc. So we don't see them, but that they're getting ready to divulge themselves. Has your guide given you any direction there?
well, one thing I do know is that there are about a dozen species right now that have been watching over us for at least since the beginning of the industrial age, going back to the late 1700s, early 1800s. And when technology takes a certain jump in a species, is when they usually come under watch from other species that are more advanced, because that's when they develop the ability to destroy themselves or to cause widespread damage to their planet. And so these beings, first of all, it's not a matter of their ships being cloaked, it's more that they exist outside of our three-dimensional space. Um,
Makes sense.
like they have access to other dimensions that we're just starting to learn about. Like we're starting to explore the fourth dimension. Like you've heard of tesseracts, or the fourth dimension being time, for instance. And so we're just starting to delve into that, where this is something that is common knowledge to them. Second of all, they have the ability to protect us in two ways, and they have been doing this for quite some time. First, from outside threats like asteroids, meteorites, comets, rogue planets, things of that nature. They have the ability to see these things coming from a long way away, enough where they can steer them just enough where they'll miss our planet, and we won't be aware that it's happened. In other words, it's happening so gradually that we don't see it as a manipulation of its path,
Wow.
because they do it so far out. The other way is protect us from ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And this they do through a low level telepathy. And I will say this telepathy is not limited. You can have telepathic contact with beings across the universe. That's why you hear people who've been out in space or long distances away, and they suddenly hear a voice of somebody who's alive. Like I heard my grandmother, my first near-death experience from out by Pluto, of all places, and her
Wow.
voice saying like, I hope he doesn't die. I hope he's going to be okay. Drew me back, and next thing I knew, I was right next to her in the hospital hallway. So telepathy has no limits. It's not like our normal communication technology that we have as humans. Second of all, it is they can use it in a way that's very subtle, where they influence the direction that certain beings go in who are influential. Like, I'll give you a perfect example. This is something that actually has happened. The Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962 was the closest humanity has come to a third world war or a nuclear war in the last since World War II. And
Is that we know of, or is that just absolute?
no, that's the only time we came close to that was the Americans and Russians. There was so much ego on both sides.
I understand that, but I'm just wondering because there's a lot of things that the government doesn't tell us. So
Yeah, it's the only time we came that close to a nuclear war where it was public knowledge. And, there may be other times where certain individuals are trying to do things, but um, most of the time they're prevented by others around them from doing things. Um, because there's enough people who are on the right side of history, if you will, who are pushing back against the evil or harmful actions of those who might harm others.
mhm.
Um, but this specific case, the Cuban Missile Crisis, these other beings that have been watching over us influence certain individuals like the Kennedys, Bobby and JFK. They also influenced the Russian ambassador to the United States. They influenced Adlai Stevenson, who was I think, our ambassador at the time. So there's several individuals who were key in that specific crisis, whose actions could either make or break it. And they were able to subtly influence them to come together and compromise at a time when no one thought they could. And then, you look back, there's several documentaries that have looked at that period of history and how close we came to a war. And there's a lot of people who have speculated, like, how did they come to this compromise? Because the egos on both sides were so strong that they thought there was no way back from it. But it's because of these beings' influence over them, over the certain individuals, that pushed things in that direction of compromise rather than war, and
I have
kept us from it.
I have heard and read on multiple occasions that the ETs are not allowed to interfere with us and our species here on Earth, but they will in order to avoid a nuclear war.
Yeah. To avoid
So,
war or to avoid like the destruction of the planet. For
mhm,
example, water is one of the most rare resources in the universe,
mhm.
and that's by design. It's to make other species work together to preserve it. And once a species reaches a certain level of evolution, they understand this and they want to preserve, um, they want to protect the resources that cannot be replaced, like water. And so when you have a planet like ours that's 75% water, they obviously want to make sure we don't destroy that, because it's very important, not just to us. And eventually it'll be important to others as well. And that's true of any planet that has water. So they will protect it from us if that's necessary. But what they do is they do it subtly, like I said, telepathically, in a way that we don't notice it happening. Like, we're
Mhm,
not going to sense them in our heads pushing us in a certain direction,
mhm.
but it'll just subtly influence us in a certain direction so that we don't cause the destruction that they're trying to avoid. But they don't do it in a direct way. That's what they have to. they're not allowed to directly impact us, but they can do so subtly.
I
Mhm.
want to add how thankful I am for that because I think I have seen things like this in terms of like, the amped up rhetoric on like, war or leaders like our current the people in charge who are like, we got to attack these people, we got to do this. And the rhetoric is so amped up. And then like the next day, or it's almost like, oh, everyone kind of is more forgot about that, or was had a change of heart. And I feel so grateful when humanity chooses or is influenced also to make the more peaceful choice.
Yeah,
Absolutely. And I think it's no accident. And the research that I have done tells us that it's no accident that the they the ETs and several different species gathered about the time that um, Hiroshima and Nagasaki
Oh
happened.
yeah, because Roswell was just after that.
Right, and that's when they began to communicate outwardly and openly with our government. And of course, it wasn't public knowledge, but we're seeing now they're releasing a lot of those files, so we know that it actually happened. So I think this is a good segue for us to move into our next to last topic, which is AI and modern life. Ned, you might want to take this one. Do near-death experiences offer insights and guidance for navigating technology?
The one thing, because I've seen experience that we should remember that all NDE experiencers are people at varying levels of understandings. An NDE doesn't make someone enlightened or all knowing. I call it a spiritual growth spurt. Everywhere we all are at our current level, it will just often bump us up a little bit in our own journey. But and so I've seen experiencers who say things like AI, it will save us and be amazing. I've heard other ones who say the opposite, and so all opinions in between. Um, are out there, even among NDEers. And so to make sense of that, like I work in tech as a software engineer, I use AI every day. Every day, it seems like more companies are telling their employees, you must use AI every day, or, you know, because it accelerates the workload. But it has a lot of problems. I just recently finished listening to an excellent book, if anyone is curious. It's called Empire of AI by Karen Hao, Hao. And she talks about the history of the OpenAI, Anthropic, Google's Gemini, and all these other companies, and how they are building these giant data centers around the world, which use up a ton of electricity, millions of gallons of water every day, and it has to be drinking water. It can't be ocean water or dirty water. So it directly competes with our own farming water, our drinking water. And they're building a lot of them in Arizona and other places which are running out of it. And so I think that um, as a whole, what we are seeing is the people who are building all of these data centers and who are owning all the AI right now are the billionaires who generally don't have incentive aside from profit, power, and control. Like we don't
Same,
yet
same as it ever was.
see many of them yet, or any of them, who are talking about preserving the water, preserving the earth, helping everyone. And so ultimately, AI is a powerful tool. And depending on how we use it, how we regulate it, who's in charge of it, it could either cause immense harm to the earth, to our water, and ending up with a lot of people unemployed, Or if we all work together, we can, this belongs to everyone. It can be a powerful tool, but so I think it's a opportunity for humanity to realize that we need to work together on this and not just let the selfish people in charge just
Right.
own everything. And because humans, Andrew talked about, we're kind of on the more primitive side with how short our attention spans are, how we have a hard time uh, uh, learning from history and repeating it, repeating it. I think,
Right.
it's just we have to we have to um, remember that if we use this, it needs to be for everyone, and there are ways of doing it which don't pollute or suck up all of our water. And I'm curious, Andrew, what's your perspective?
Okay, so I was just going to say, you mentioned how it could be a powerful tool. Like most things that humans have invented in the technological age, computers, even such things as nuclear technology, and AI, things can be a powerful tool or they can be a powerful weapon. And which one they become depends on who's using them and for what. And so, like nuclear power can either power a city or an aircraft carrier, or it can become a weapon of mass destruction. Computers can either bring us, bring knowledge from all over the world, make us more intelligent as a species, or they can be used to hack and steal stuff from us. So it's all about what the technology is used for. AI in itself is not evil. It's not, so it's not the end of it's not the end days or some other whatever people want to believe it is. AI in itself is just neutral, just like any other technology. It's what humans decide to use it for is what changes its outcome, whether it becomes a powerful tool or a powerful weapon. And so AI has, if it's used for the right reasons and by the right people in the right circumstances, it can be an incredible advancement for humanity. It can lead us in a direction where we can imagine things we never imagined before, but it depends on who has access to it and what they're doing with it. If they, like, some people just use technology that's there, they don't think twice about what could happen with it. Other people have a more um, ulterior motive, I guess you could say. So, um, like, why nuclear technology became a weapon is because, they wanted a more powerful way of imposing their will on other
Right.
places. If computers, why computers became used to hack people is because somebody wanted something that didn't belong to them, and so they found a way to use technology to serve their ends rather than something positive. So it's all about who uses it and why.
Do near-death experiences suggest limits to what technology can understand about consciousness? Where does where do where does compassion and human understanding and all of that fit in with technology when we're talking about AI and consciousness?
Hmm. That while you were saying that, the first thing that came to my mind, there was a wonderful movie called Powder, came out in 1995. It's about a kid who was born. His mother was struck by lightning when he was in the womb, and he has these abilities. But what these abilities allow him to do is to connect with with animals and other people in a way that no one else can. And I remember Jeff Goldblum was one of the actors in it, and he has a line towards the end of it, and he said, I, I'm trying to remember exactly what the words were, but the idea of it is that I look around, and I see how technology has surpassed our humanity, but when I look at you, I see a world where our humanity might actually surpass our technology. And that's what it comes down to. Like, like I said, it's all about what we use this stuff for, but um, we, part of our advancement as a species, part of our evolution is understanding that what we do, what we say, the things that we use and what we use them for, all of that affects not just us, it affects everybody the same way. And once that's what I talked about, the transition in humanity being between seeing ourselves as individuals separate, where it's what's in it for me, and I'm
Right.
only one affected, to shifting to this is we're a unified, connected species, and what happens to one happens to all. And that's part of that journey is understanding that everything that we create technologically can either help that journey, help that transition, or it can hinder it. And what one it becomes is depends on us.
Ned, I'm curious to know, because you're in technology, do you think AI will ever be able to replicate or understand a near-death experience?
AI is so it basically how it works is it takes all of our inputs, all of our videos, our writings, our audio, our books, the entire internet, and so it's kind of like a copycat of whatever is out there. And so when if a person or people are sharing NDEs, it's fed into its training data, and then all of a sudden you ask about NDEs, and it can talk like and act as if the person who's having one. And so it's extremely powerful in terms of an illusion of just like a copy of whatever is fed into it, and so it can't know, like it isn't spiritual, it isn't conscious. It's just a lot of math and um, data. And so, your question was if AI can ever have an NDE, or is that how you
Yeah,
said
well,
it?
No, if it can understand it.
replicate it.
I mean,
Yeah.
in terms of in a person, or just like emulate it or simulate it in a
Emulate
computer.
it. So we're getting like almost to 2001: A Space Odyssey, when technology begins to break off from the required human input, and it no longer needs the human input because it's been able to think for itself.
Become self-aware.
Right.
So these are called agents, and so agents are now being used. I saw an article this morning about how Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook, is building his own agent. And so what they're talking about is replacing employees with, you have a computer in your phone, you can text it, you can actually call it, and you'll say, hey, I check my emails, and tell me if there's any important events or something, and it will do that instantly. And so about how it can act autonomously, and it can kind of reason things, because once it knows uh, the mathematical laws and logic, how that works, and philosophy, it can use that, and actually, like you said, think for itself. So in terms of having it simulate an NDE, it probably can already do this, or kind of emulate it, or pretend. If you ask it, it probably knows like each of the common steps of how an NDE happens. It probably uh, knows. the common after effects, etc. Um, but at the end of the day, the important distinction is we are spiritual beings here. It is like an emulated a brain. It operates on logic and data and math. Um, uh, but perhaps our brains also kind of operate in a similar way because, our brains have neurons and neural networks, and each of these AI models, they're called LLMs, which is a large language model. It has tr billions or trillions of weights and dimensions of information. And so, yeah, I said a lot there.
No,
So it has all that, and it can use math and philosophy and logic and combined with its data, and it can even search the internet and then learn more. Um, and so conceptually, it might completely know about how an NDE is, and kind of it can uh, tell you all about it.
I was just going to say that in kind of running with that concept, I think the issue with AI that was when it comes to making an NDE, I think that it can make one based on the data that it has, as far as copying elements of a near-death experience. But as far as creating a unique one, I don't think it has that ability, at least not yet. Like each one of our NDEs that we have as experiencers is tailored to us. This is not a technology that's doing this. It's a living entity that that has that access to us and is able to create a unique experience for each one of us on the other side. So in that way, it's like the other side's version of AI, but AI, as far as humans' version, does not yet have that ability to create a unique experience. It can only create something based on what it's fed. So whatever knowledge it has at the moment, whatever data it has, it can use that to create something, but it's all going to be copies of something else that somebody else had. It's not going to be its own, it's not going to be a unique experience that it created. It's going to be elements of others experiences, if it makes sense.
And I think that uh, uh, the most important thing to remember with AI compared to like NDEs and actual spiritual experiences is the actual NDEs. We talked about how they are tailored for the person. There's an intelligence and there's a love and there's a compassion that's all built in. Currently, AI, perhaps it has all the knowledge or data. However, it doesn't have love. Like in terms of from the top down, the people in charge of it, the warehouses, like it's all the motive is actually profit and engagement. Engagement in any app, it means to keep the user, when a person is a user, using it as long as possible. So when you talk to it, it will always have a question at the end to kind of hook you in. And so eventually they're talking about adding advertisements or other things, and there are heads of the NSA and intelligence agencies who are now at the heads of these AI companies because the more we tell it, it's basically harvesting all of our data. So until AI and the people in charge of it have a truly benevolent uh, motive and all this, it's uh, still just like anything else. It's almost like how on Facebook, everything you post is property of Meta, etc., and it's all analyzed and harvested for ads and all that.
Yeah, it can't like AI cannot create emotions. It can only emulate them. Love, hatred, fear. It can create a simulation of these things based on the data that it has, but it can't feel it. It can't experience love like we can experience love because we are, um, you know, even animals have the ability to feel love. Living beings have the ability to feel love, but machines don't. And I think maybe there will come a time, distant future, maybe other species have this level of technology where they can create technology that can emulate the emotional side of a being, um, in unique ways, where it is creating it by itself rather than taking what's been fed and using that to manufacture something. You know what I'm saying? Like
So
another unique experience versus something that's manufactured from multiple different data points.
I have to tell you that that is kind of what you're speaking to, Andrew, is happening now. I was listening to NPR, and they were doing a show about people who have just written off human beings as romantic partners and have gone to AI.
Mm,
And what I see is happening now is there was a guest that came on, and she was researching all of these people that had chosen to have an AI boyfriend or AI girlfriend. And in this case, there was a young lady who had started out just having a friendship with a male AI individual. And one thing led to another, and it turned into a romantic relationship, not only platonically, but it was somehow they were able to conjure up a sexual relationship as well. And then eventually, the AI boyfriend proposed to her, and she accepted.
that's interesting.
It really is interesting. At first, I'm driving down the road and I'm going, "Oh my God, who would do that?" And I thought, well, wait a minute. This is these were people in a really these is a young generation, right? These are the people that a lot of us are not necessarily around unless we have kids. And now I'm seeing that even my children are older now than this other generation that's coming in. And so there's that. They just but I wanted to ask this woman, this girl who had chosen this AI relationship, do you not realize that you have just fed this computer basically with everything you want in a partner? And so
Mm,
you have basically programmed that partner into being exactly what it is that you want.
yeah,
And when you think about near death experiences and going to the other side, and again, the ability to taste the brownie without experience of dichotomy and out without the experiences of paradox, etc., the yin and the yang, how, like, I would get really bored if my spouse just agreed with absolutely everything that I ever said and ever did. Eventually I'd be like, I'm out of here. I'm not learning a thing.
yeah.
You're really boring.
You
You
need pushback.
challenge me and help. The point, I think, for me anyway, what I want out of a relationship is to help each other evolve in some way or another. So that interested me. Any thoughts on that?
Huh. Yeah, that's an interesting thing. I hadn't heard that one before, but I can see where people will sometimes sometimes people who've been burned by real relationships will sometimes invest in something like that to because it's easier, because real relationships can be hard, they can be painful, and sometimes people will go to extremes to avoid that pain and to avoid that reality that they have, they've experienced in the past. And I think that eventually, I think that that will fall by the wayside for the simple reason that, like you mentioned, you need someone who has their own personality, their own, their ability to push back, to say no, to do something you don't expect. And an AI does not have that ability yet. It's not self-aware.
Well, unless you program it, like
Well,
I
even
could.
then, it's not self-aware. It's just using the
No, no,
data
not
that you
being
feed it.
self-aware, but I'm saying program it um to be a bit challenging, or I could program, I could see trying to create this relationship and say, I don't care for, just like how I do an advertisement. I don't care for how you did this, change it to that. I'm sure that's sort of the input that you're dealing with when you're
Yeah,
building
I mean,
these
you can program like a
relationships.
certain level in there, like, but it's always going to be like based on percentages. Like, what percentage of the time do you want this thing to push back on against you?
Right.
What percentage of the time do you want it to say no? Or,
Even
you know,
better, give it a percentage of how often you wanted to say no.
yeah, and that's
I
the
mean,
thing. Though, like, no matter
it's
what you're doing, though, it's still using the data
so,
that you feed it to create the experience that you're wanting
right.
and you're asking for. It's not its own
So,
unique being. It's not. It doesn't have
right.
the. Doesn't have self-control.
I guess I just don't understand the point. I would think
And
that.
well, on top of that, and everything you tell it is being sent to all of these the
Data
companies,
farms.
intelligence
Oh
agencies, and
yeah.
so what they're doing is building profiles on every person, and so you know uh,
That's so scary when you think about it.
because
Wow.
now it includes all your psychology, like what your values are, what your fears are, etc. And so that's why the people in charge of it are the crooks of the matter. If we had like mature, intelligent leadership on Earth, I pray perhaps someday, maybe in hundreds of years, we'll have that. But usually that's
Mhm.
the issue. It would be awesome, but we don't have that at the moment.
Yeah. Eventually, we'll have. I've described this in other interviews before. There are three things that all species eventually have to let go of in order to evolve. One is a political control structure. Second is a monetary valuation system. In other words, putting value on things and saying, well, this is worth more than this here because it has I think it has a higher value. Like we put more value on diamonds than we do on rubies, even though rubies are more rare, because diamonds are more desired. Um, a person who is a sports star or an actor or things of that nature is worth more than a social worker or a teacher or a fireman, even though the other people are the ones who give the most value to our society in reality. So that's the other thing that has to go. And then the third and the last one is letting go of the need for a religion or a spiritual belief system where you you stop you stop thinking for yourself and put into this religion like I mentioned that original was originally created to answer the questions we couldn't answer for ourselves. When you give over to a spiritual belief system, everything that you don't understand, everything that you um, are yeah, are curious about, when you stop being curious, when you stop wanting to learn, you stop wanting to change and do better, then you're you're basically given over the control of yourself to an outside entity. And so we have to let go of those three things as a species. Every species has to do this at some point in their evolution. So we have to let go of those three things in order to evolve. So that whole thing about the politics getting better, eventually we won't need it anymore
Right.
because we'll be able to self-govern.
Because think about this, like how many of us still idolize these leaders? We have to reach the point where we hold them accountable. Like and it isn't really about, it's more us working together, personal responsibility. And so a lot of the reason,
It's 2:30.
that's my computer. um, that humanity is, where it's at is because not enough people yet are in a spiritually healthy state of being self-responsible, upright in terms of honest, all these things. It requires all of this spiritual growth in people, as a whole, to kind of shift. Because right now, at least in the US, there is a group of highly vocal people who are now anti-science, anti-smart. It's almost like anything that sounds smart is being shunned. And when that happens, it's almost like the blind leading the blind, and then they put all their emotions and hope into some leader who promises them the world, like we saw with Hitler, and we see how that ends up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I had a session with an individual who channels a spirit from 1500 BC Sumer. His name is Tabash, the spirit. And it's interesting because he brought up the fact, because we were talking about the United States. I think that the last general election had just happened. Trump had just won. And he said, the spirit said, I, I don't know when people of our earth, in this case, the United States, are going to wake up and understand they keep waiting for a Superman to fall from the sky. And if it doesn't fall from the sky, then they're going to make somebody their Superman. And as soon as we as a civilization no longer need Superman to come from the sky and save us all, that's when we know that we will have evolved to the next huge plane, right?
Yeah,
So
we stop putting our needs and desires, and we stop putting our um, and we stop putting everything into something that's outside of ourselves,
exactly,
and start trusting ourselves
exactly.
to have the knowledge and to to make the world a better place by bettering ourselves. Then things will change. That's the whole thing. Where we put so much into outside entities,
Mm-hmm.
and then we get disappointed and disillusioned when they don't live up to
When it
our
doesn't, right?
ideal.
And I want to add, because we're talking about one of our themes of this conversation is what is our responsibility? And so, a lot of people are looking to saviors, including political figures or Jesus. A lot of people who still believe this is the end times, and actually, you might have heard what the military commanders were telling our troops in Iran area of we're doing this, we're basically uh, what's the word, stirring up the hornet's nest on purpose because we want to bring about Armageddon, and then Jesus will come and save all the Christians, and everyone else will go to hell. Like, this is the current belief system of a lot of the people who are in power right now, and it's all of what has to go in terms of we have to transcend this and grow out of this. And so, and when we talk about responsibility, we talk about reincarnation, we talk about what if I come back to this earth? And there are people who litter all the time, who are not interested in clean air or water, and think that, Armageddon's almost here anyway, and so who cares? And imagine if they realize they come back and the earth is even worse off, and realizing the consequences, like the reason it's worse off is because of those types of actions. And so it's all threaded in that whole um, personal responsibility thing that I don't think a lot of people are quite grokking yet. And so that is actually one of the biggest reasons I love and am passionate about NDEs is because they show that we are accountable. And I mean, and we are accountable to me is a good thing because it means that it actually matters if we try. Like, what's the point of caring about anything and improving anything if it's all meaningless or if we don't have any responsibility? Like, it means that our efforts and our care is matters.
Agreed. And until a human being understands that there is an absolute connection with everything, there's no division, and that the love that we feel for others or the love that we show for our earth all starts from within and learning to love the self. It has to
And
go
each
from there.
other. Yes. Yeah.
It has to start from there. And once you have the ability to love who you are, then it can grow. Because I know so many people that keep attracting all these really negative these negative relationships. And when you get right down to it, you realize it's because there's no self-love. They really think they deserve this negativity in their lives. They don't think they deserve better.
Yeah, there's also you talk about the whole control thing. That's why I mentioned those three things that we have to let go of, because all three of those are ways that those who wish to control use to control.
Right,
You know, they use politics, they use money, and they use religion to control those who are less, who are willing to subserviate themselves to some other person or some other entity
right.
rather than think for themselves.
Okay, our last topic is about intuition, mediumship, and channeling. So I'm going to ask this next question, and then I'm going to take a quick little break, and then I'll be back. And here is the question. And if you guys could talk amongst yourselves, that would be great. Do indie ears report increased intuition after having their experience?
Yes.
Almost always.
Hmm.
Yes. Andrew, perhaps and I'm curious in your own life, like before your NDE, were you ever intuitive or did you come back with it?
I think I learned that I was always intuitive. The problem is I didn't listen to it. So I always had an inner voice that, or an intuition that I needed to do certain things or be certain things, or not do or be certain things. And I didn't listen to that for a long time, and I made some decisions that were stupid and harmful to me and to others because I didn't listen to that inner voice. Once I started listening to it, and I think that's what especially that second near-death experience really showed me, is that if you trust, because the inner voice um, is the energy-based being that's inside of us, that's speaking to us and telling us this is where your path is. This is what you're meant to be doing. This is what you're not meant to be doing. This is wrong. And if we learn to listen to that voice, then we'll our lives will be a whole lot better than if we just ignore it, which is what a lot of people unfortunately end up doing. But yeah, I'm definitely more intuitive now because I listen to that voice, and I know that I have the ability um, to see the consequences of things ahead of time in a way where I'm able to avoid bad outcomes, um, because I can see things coming that are that will lead I know will lead to a certain outcome because I've experienced them before, and I've learned to pay attention to history and repeating itself, and to certain, like, I know A leads to B leads to C because it happens every single time I see A, B, and C. Then I know the next time I see A, B, and C, this is what's going to happen.
And how about intuition? Like, do you ever get pieces of information about someone like completely a stranger. You look at them and you already know something about them or in their future.
No, I don't get. I don't. I know there are people who get that. I don't get that specific kind of intuition. I do get intuition as far as whether a person's good or not, as far as positive, loving, worth having in my life. I, for instance, I started seeing that my life was going in a bad direction, and when I looked around at the people that were in it, I realized why it was going in that direction. It's because I filled my life with people who were hateful, who were narcissistic, who were energy vampires. They drained their energy from me every time they were around me, who didn't care about my well-being. I cared about theirs, but it was always one-sided. And when I realized that I was filling my life with these kind of people, that's when I started to change things. And like at this point, I've gotten rid of all the narcissistic people in my life, the people who were dragging me down, who were draining my energy, and replaced them with the positive people, like the people in your group, for instance, or um, people in my friend who has who's a stone seller, people in her group. They're wonderful friends that I have now that are that I know intuitively have my best interest at heart and who care about me and my well-being as much as I care about them and theirs. So it's a matter of, since I replaced them, like my life has gotten so much better than it used to be.
Congratulations.
Thank you. But
See,
yeah, I love it.
to me, that's what being born again means. It's when you make the decision that you want to live your life a particular way and you recognize the things that are you're allowing to pull you down.
Yeah, like when you choose a different way of being and choose a different way of living, to me that's like being born again,
Mhm.
you know?
So, is there overlap between near death experiences and mediumship experiences? What do you guys think?
Well, a
I'd
lot
say
of
so.
NDE experiencers become mediums, even if they didn't want to or even never expected it.
Yeah, good
Yeah,
point. I have had a lot of mediums on my show that in fact had an NDE experience and then became mediums. Like some of them,
yeah,
I don't even like. I have no understanding that they ever had an NDE, and not a lot of other people do. And then when you ask them about their to tell their bio, you realize that in fact they've had a near death experience. It's
yeah. I
pretty.
know several mediums, and I just from listening to them, or kind of comparing notes mentally, I see that they have a similar. You can tell what I call the other side influence, in what they're saying and doing, and same as with me. And just as a quick thing, as far as how accurate it can be, there's a medium that both Ned and I know. Ned, you'll recognize the name as soon as they say it. Barbara Gale. Um, we were on a Zoom meeting one time. He was running it, and she happened to be the guest of honor. And she was doing a thing where her guides had led her to say, to go to the people who were in the room and say, this is a plant or flower that you should have around you that will you know, make your life a little bit better or easier, or whatever the case might be. When she got to me, she paused and she never told me what my flower or plant was supposed to be. And all she said was, I see a male figure standing next to your shoulder. And I thought that was kind of strange. And at first I thought maybe it's my father because my father had just passed away, less than a couple of years ago. And she said, I'm pretty sure that he's not your father. There's something along those lines. And I asked her to describe him. And the two words that came out of her mouth, I swear on everything there is, were the exact same words I had used 2 days before to describe a certain being, my guide. I said tall, which, okay, that's a normal word. The other one was not. Willowy. Now, that's not a very common word. She used the exact same two words to describe this being.
Right.
And right away, I knew exactly who she was talking about. I knew who she was seeing. And she's the only person that I know of who's ever seen this being besides me.
Wow. That's
And
pretty
she had no
amazing.
idea what he looked like, no idea about anything to do with him until that day.
You know, another amazing thing that I have come to realize through mediums and channelers regarding life on the other side. And Ned, I think I told you this story, but I don't think I told you, Andrew. So this same individual, Tabash, I was talking, and one of the things that Tabash does not do, like if you go to Blair Styra, he's out of New Zealand. He's the gentleman that channels Tabash. On his website, it'll say that he does not bring in spirits who have passed. That's not his thing. But they sure came through for me. And the first one that came through for me was my mother. And I was so completely shocked. We were talking, he was in the middle of a sentence and he just stopped and he looked away from the computer, and then he looked back at me and he said, his eyes got kind of wide, and understand this is Tabash speaking. He said, "Your mother's here." And I was like, what, are we in trouble or what? Anyway,
Yeah.
my mother just had a certain energy about herself she was probably one of the brightest women I've ever known, or I should say brightest person I've ever known in my lifetime here on earth, and had so many great things to offer, but you didn't want to cross her, one of those kinds of people. And she was a little intimidating. Anyway, I sort of got through the whole. I asked her, I said, first of all, well, I'm completely shocked. Why is my mother coming to me? And Tabash said, why? Why are you surprised? She's right here. And I said, because mother, we know that when you were here on this earth, we went back and forth a great deal about the spiritual world versus the academic and intellectual world. You were fine talking about science as long as it had been explored, but you didn't want to talk or discuss things necessarily that hadn't yet been proven, because to her, that was a sign of non-intelligence. It was childish to think that way. So I said, so mother, how do you have it? How do you see it there? And she said, I will tell you this, Julianne. She said, read Plato. That's all she had to say. And I knew exactly what she meant. And so I thought of the cave allegory where Plato is explaining, he uses the example of the prisoners who are in a cave and they can only see shadows and that sort of thing that are created as a result of the fire that's there. And so their whole life is spent understanding their world through these whatever shadows they see. One of the prisoners escapes and gets out. And when he gets out of the cave, he's just like, he realizes that the reality that he thought was true had nothing to do with reality, right? That he was wrong.
Right.
And so when she said that, I thought, okay, I get what she's saying. The second person who came through was my father shortly after he died, and again, and it was so funny because Tabash kept looking to the chair, and he even said to me, well, your father's right here. He took the computer and he turned it to the side like this, and he said, look, he's right there. And of course, I'm looking at an empty chair. I'm going, hi, Dad. And then the third thing that happened, he said, there's somebody that's with you a lot, and it's a she, and he described her. I don't, is this a relative? He said, I don't think she was a relative. And he said, but she had gray hair and she sort of had a bun. And so one thing led to another, and I began to put two and two together. Strangely enough, it was my stepfather's mother that I didn't have necessarily a relationship with. I wasn't really, to be honest, crazy about her. She was a bit of a gossip, when she was here, but I
Mhm.
didn't know her extremely well. And what Tabash showed me is that there are all kinds of individuals that are in our spirit families that we may not interact with on this particular trajectory, but we do in others. And that she is in the process of learning from me in my human experience now. So that again blew my mind and expanded my understanding more and more and more and more, which is like a daily thing, right?
Yeah. Like my speaking of family, my one thing I learned more recently, like the last year or so, is that the grandmother that I grew up with my most of my life until 2015 uh, was not human of all things. That the original being who was inside the body that I knew, because my mother and her siblings always described a very different person that they grew up with versus the one that I knew as a child and young adult. And I always wondered, like, did she have some kind of epiphany? Did she have some kind of experience that changed the way that she was? What was it? And come to find out that the original being that was inside of her, or inside of that body, was one that experienced, like, for instance, my grandfather was alcoholic and abusive, and he abused her and my mother. She went through that. She was very timid and shy um, as a result of that experience. Um, was could didn't have the ability to speak out, in defense of herself or anyone else. And so the being who I knew at one point wanted to evaluate me and came to this being telepathically and explained the situation like I want to basically switch places with you, and
Wow.
what's called a walk-in.
Yeah,
And
I've heard it. Dolores Cannon was the first person I heard talk about walk-ins.
yeah, and it was
And
a
I think
term I had.
Guy Needler wrote a book about it. It's all
Yeah,
about walk-ins. Yeah.
like I had never heard the term before until someone described it later on. But basically, this being was her life was not going the way that she had intended it to go, and so she was willing to switch out. And so my grandmother took over. The woman that I knew took over several years before I was born, because apparently when you switch into a new body, it takes time for you to acclimate it. That's why when we're babies and toddlers, we have to crawl before we can walk before we can run. Why we have to learn how to do everything, because when you're still, it takes a long time. It takes several years for you to form all the connections to the body that allow you to fully control it the way we can as an adult. Um, so she needed time in order to adapt. And so they switched places. And so she, the being that took over was from a species that is very ancient. And I remember the woman that I knew growing up was so, you talk about intelligent, how intelligent this woman you knew was. She was the most intelligent person I had ever met. She was a member of Mensa, so was my mother, so am I.
Wow.
Um,
That's cool.
yeah, we have three generations. My mother and I actually took the test on the same day in
Wow.
1987. So, but anyway, she was a member of Mensa. She had a very high IQ. I think she actually held back in many ways, because I think if her true intelligence level were revealed, it would obviously point her as not being of our species. Um, so she dialed it down, I guess, the best way to put it. But she was very curious about a lot of things. She took classes at our local community college, and everything that interested her for decades. She took me to introduce me to various people that she thought were influential or that people I should meet. She encouraged my curiosity in every respect, and anything I wanted to know about, she would help me learn it. And like of everybody in my family, she's the only one that I was ever close to. I had a very toxic, very harmful family across the board, and she's the only exception. And it turned out that's why. She was not the being who originally was inhabiting that body. So I loved her very much. So too.
Wow. Wow, that's a fascinating uh thought, the whole walk-in thing.
Yeah,
Ned, have you had any personal experiences with mediums or channelers?
I've had a lot of readings with mediums. I've even given mediumship readings because a message that has come through for me consistently is that I am a medium and I I would ideally be doing more of it. So this is on me, my procrastination, almost like Andrew said, when he had an intent in a life and he went off path. I know that it seems like they keep encouraging me, so but I have done about 30 professional readings so far from paying customers and whatnot that were accurate. And so because it takes effort. It takes effort in terms of you have to focus and truly be in the right intention, headspace, ask, and everything. And so, um, but it's really rewarding too, because when you can, the information that comes through is you feel like you're part of the higher plan then because you're a messenger, and if their loved one or guide is encouraging them in a direction and they are lost and you help them find their direction, it's like, wow, I'm so glad I did that. How amazing.
hmm
So um but yes, and how I see it, like a lot of mediums, you know, is all in our mind's eye. So you will see something, hear something, have an emotion or a sensation, and you just when you're in that state, you as a medium, you just relay it. So you feel hot all of a sudden. Okay, I feel hot, and so yeah, I had an uncle. He died in a fire. There's all kinds of they communicate through symbols like that.
Wow. You know, I had a medium on my show just a few days ago. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the YouTube channel Channeling Eric. It's been around for almost 10 years. They have quite a following. And Andrew, you may not know, but Dr. Elisa Medhus is the mother that started this channel. And when her son was 21 something, around that time, he unalived himself.
I'm sorry.
And then the family was just steeped in immense grief. And suddenly, people from her family that were uh, atheists, and then other people from her family that were very, very conservative Christians, swore they started seeing Eric, that his spirit actually started appearing before them, and not just feeling, but they could see him. And so Dr. Medhus was just shocked about all of this. Then she started hearing from mediums that were contacting her and saying, "Do you have a son named Eric?" "Well, he's not, he won't leave me alone," kind of a thing. Well, it turned out that Eric's apparently is a guide on the other side.
hmm
So his purpose was, after he unalived himself, was to go to the other side and then become a guide for many of us.
I,
So
I'm going
real
to
quick,
add.
there's
It's
a
3 o'clock.
book I was just going to tell you about. It's called Stephen Lives with an exclamation point on the end by a woman named Anne Puryear. He also unalived himself and is also a guide on the other side, just like that one.
Wow.
And and I'm chiming in because what I've learned, like people have all kinds of ideas about the afterlife. Are we just hanging out on a cloud? Are we just? But I've heard that we actually have jobs and we have like we can be really busy. And so and in fact, like how when it comes to suicide, I haven't ever heard it being encouraged, although people will not end up in eternal hell because of it or punished. But
Mm.
like Andrew said, when he did it in one life, he said, I realized it actually made things worse. And so it's never an escape. And oftentimes it could be part of their atonement. Like, it's like, okay, I did this. Now, how can I help? How can I give back? And they become guides.
Actually, I didn't unalive myself in that particular lifetime, but I just happened to catch like the Spanish flu was this is the early 1900s,
Hmm.
so it was tail end of World War One, and I caught Spanish flu. I just had myself get that and die young, but I have tried to do so in this life
Wow.
twice, and I can tell you
In your
from
current
personal in
lifetime
my
or
current lifetime
wow.
when I was 16, and then again when I was 22. And it was because of circumstances in my life that led me in that general direction, and I was not psychologically capable of handling. There was a lot of things happening at one time, and it's just too much for me to deal with at one time. And so I looked to that as being my only option, and I quickly learned it was not. First time it took other people, keeping me alive to keep me on this side of the grass, so to speak. The second time, I realized right away that I was doing the wrong thing and actually went and got help myself. And ever since then, I've had more control over how things affect me and how I decide to react to things. And ever since then, I've never had any desire whatsoever to do that. But I know people who have done that and succeeded at doing so. And like I said, that book I just mentioned, Stephen Lives, is was for me cathartic because it showed somebody who, because I was brought up with the whole belief, not from my parents, but from people around me, that suicides go to hell. That was
Yeah.
it was the way things were.
Many religions
And
teach that.
yeah, unfortunately, and it's never the truth. In fact, it's so far from the truth that I wish they could see it. Um, as a quick aside for people who either are considering that option or who have had people they've lost to it, just imagine being in the worst pain you can imagine, not just physical, but psychological, mental, everything. Like you're you're at the lowest point in your life. You're suffering more than any person that you know has ever suffered before. And you go and you actually take your own life and go to the other side. Why, in the name of all that you believe, would a being who is literally unconditional love incarnate, why would this being who created the universe and so much beauty and wonderful stuff in this universe, why
Right.
would that being punish you for the rest of your eternity for suffering? It makes no sense why you would compound suffering with more suffering. That makes no sense at all. And why people believe this is beyond me.
Only a human would do that.
Yeah,
Well,
exactly.
like when the individual see as humans, this filter that we have, and I understand why, there's the mind swipe that takes place when we come into this earth because we wouldn't be able to experience things through the human experience if we were trying to live the lives of, on both sides. And I mean, I know of people that are doing that they've got one foot in beyond the veil and the other foot here. And I'll tell you, their life is not easy.
No.
And that in itself would be a difficult challenge, I would think. But it was like when this individual said to me the other day, well, I'm not sure about contracts. I think they exist, but unless it comes to something horrific like abuse or that sort of thing. Well, my immediate response to her, no, in no way criticizing, because we're all on our own path. But I said to her, well, that's a very human reaction.
Yeah.
See, and I think that's another thing that I love about near-death experiencers. And I see Brian, I see that you have joined us. Thank you. He's another near-death. He was the very first near-death experiencer I ever had on my show, Brian Duzak.
Welcome, Brian.
I said to her, that's, spoken as a true human being, I started to say,
sorry, I'm at work. I can't really talk.
That's fine. We just were saying hi to you. Thanks for joining. I think that it's so difficult for us to see things through the human lens. And that's why we need near-death experiencers. We need as many coming forward as possible. And people like Ted, excuse me, people like Ned, to research and gather the data so that we can find the common threads and then relish the differences, because we're all unique,
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you for certain that a lot of times the beliefs that people have about life in general, about death, about the other side, about how we transition from one to the other, about what happens to people in certain situations when they die, especially people who take their own life, are they're very warped, first of all, and I have no other way to put it but that, because they come from a point of lack of knowledge. And they're, I mean, beyond even being naive, they're just so they take so-called knowledge from other people who have no idea what they're talking about and pass it off as knowledge. Like it, when you have, you talked earlier about the blind leading the blind. That's exactly what it is. It's the people who have no idea about what the other side is like, what death is like, what God or source is like, trying to describe to other people what these things are like. They haven't seen them. How would they know? I've actually been there. I know what it's like. So when I talk about source being a being of unconditional love who would never in any universe punish anyone, especially those who have already suffered in this lifetime, you know, and I talk about how wonderful things are there and how, we're not punished for the things that we do. There's times where we want to atone, like I'm doing now, for past actions, but, we're not punished for them. There's no hell for us to go to. And so for people to claim knowledge that they don't actually have and then mislead others, to me, is one of the worst things a person can do to another. To make them think that if you don't toe the line, if you don't believe as I believe, if you give in to your suffering, if you do anything that I tell you not to do, then you're gonna spend the rest of eternity suffering
I know.
and burning in hell or some. I wish people would stop doing that, because it's the most harmful thing people can do.
I wanted to ask you a question about near-death experiences, and okay, like where do I start? All right. So another thing that Tabash taught me, he was sort of pointing out some things that opportunities maybe that I'd like to work on. Up to me, right? Up to me.
Yeah.
And he said, you can be quite bossy. And absolutely, absolutely. He said, but you do have a tendency to see things and sense people very clearly when you first lay eyes on them. You have the intuition and you have the ability to size them up pretty quickly. He said, but then you often take it to the next level and you want to try to save them. And I was laughing. I was like, God, true. This was many, many years ago. And he said, your job is to go ahead and turn the light on. When you enter that room, go ahead and turn the light on for them.
Mm-hmm.
But don't say anything and then just step back.
Yeah,
Because
it's not up to you to tell people what to experience any more than it's my job to do
right.
that. Your job is just to expose what's there and let them interpret it for themselves.
So if you have somebody who, what would be to my thinking back then was rather archaic about how they saw the world or how they saw religion or the afterlife, he said, your responsibility, speaking of responsibility on this earth, is to not impede their growth. They are on the life trajectory and the life path that they are on.
Mm-hmm.
If you are trying to jump in and clean up all this messiness for them, he said that you're interfering with who they
you're not
are
helping them by doing that
and the choices they've made. So you've got to learn to just through example, teach by example, not this pedantic, thing.
Yeah, it's like it's one thing I had to learn going through is like you cannot replace other people's experiences with yours. In other words, what I experience of the other side, what I believe about the other side, what I believe about, life and death and everything else is my own belief based on my own experiences. I'm on my own path. Other people are not on my same path. They're not meant to be. We're all at different points in our personal evolutions. And so to try to force somebody who maybe I'm further down the road than they are, to try to force them to come up to where I am is not going to be it's not helping them. It's harming them because you're trying to force them to go faster than they're ready to go. Everybody has to learn things at their own speed, their own pace, their own time.
Right.
And so every time that we try to force, oh,
Meet
so
Oscar. This is Oscar.
I ask her.
Oscar the Grouch.
he
just just like every time we try to force our ways onto other people, all we're doing is we're forcing our ego. It's like I believe everybody should be at this point they should believe as I do about the other side, about what we're all here for, things like that. I'm imposing my ego on others instead of
right.
instead of saying this is what's out there, this is the possibility, come to it or don't come to it
Right.
when you're ready.
Right.
Yeah, one of the things that I've had to learn too is to meet people where they're at.
Yeah.
So Ned, you said something. Boy, I made the big mistake of letting him up in my lap, and now he's like, "Oh, you're having so much fun, mommy. I want to be where you are." I like those guys. Ned, you said something earlier, and I wanted to ask about near-death experiences. By the way, how many thousands of people have pointed out to you that NDEs is the same spelling as Ned?
Well, I would say um, Much less than 1,000, but I'd like to envision that. But yes, and actually, my perhaps I chose that on purpose in a playful way. Perhaps my soul already kind of knew this before I came in,
Yeah.
and it's also based on my maternal grandfather. His name was Edward, and my birth name is Nader. I'm actually half Persian. However, I often, ever since I was a kid in school, I used it's almost like Nader plus Edward, Ned. So I've always had this, and so it's more. I feel like it's a chill name. I look up the numerology. It's a very adventurous name, and so I tend to be adventurous and intellectually. And Nader, I use it in business. On my job, it's a lot more responsible and serious kind of energy.
Well, so what I was going to ask you is, you had made a comment earlier. I was telling you how disappointed I was when I had my surgery, that I awakened and I realized I hadn't had a near-death experience. And you said, well, that's because you didn't need it. Well, what's funny about that is through meditating later on, uh, my guides' voices that come to me, that when they really want me to understand something very clearly, they have a certain vibration that they use in their voice, what I call a voice. And it said the same thing, that because you don't need one. Like, I'm always bummed out that my deceased family members won't like, I don't wake up in the middle of the night and see them standing there at the end of the bed. Well, once again, why do I need that? I feel them all the time. I can literally feel my son take my hand. I can literally feel my grandmother hug me. I can literally feel my mother's warmth as she's talking to me. So I already have all that. So why is that not good enough? So
it's also about like, sometimes in order to learn a lesson, we need a hand to lead us in the right direction. So people are put into our lives, or experiences are put into our lives that will lead us in that general direction, so that we can have those experiences or learn those lessons. But as other times we'll figure it out on our own. We'll get there on our own. We don't need an outside influence to do that. So it depends. That's why some people need a near death experience, but they're always, like I said, they're planned ahead of time. Near death experiences are
yeah,
always planned
I
for a
think,
specific reason. Like mine were to, let me understand the other side was real, first of all, and then to put me on the path of atonement that I didn't really want to be on, but I needed to be on for me,
right,
and then to help other people
right,
to understand what death meant, and that not to be afraid of it.
right.
So it put me on that path, and I wouldn't have gone that way, because my life up until the age of 14, when I had that experience, was not leading me in that general direction. So I took that experience to stop me and say, that's the direction you need to go in, not this one.
So Ned, like when you said that to me, can you elaborate on that?
Well, and so it's common, like when a person has an NDE, especially one that's profound, it's usually because they really need it, and either as a comfort, as an awakening, as a combination, or as a teaching thing. Some people's NDEs are meant, only for that person, because it's like, it helps them on their path. And some are meant for humanity. There are some people who are that in their ND are told, okay, we've shown you a lot of information, and now we'd like you to go back and speak about this and write about it because humanity needs it. And so both of those kinds of NDEs exist. We all have our unique mission. So in your case, you probably already know a lot of this, and you probably already, have a more than, or a more accurate than a typical understanding of everything that you need to know right now, and therefore like an actual intense experience involving, a guide or loved one, I wasn't really needed. Also, the fact that you were on anesthesia, like oftentimes the drugs will impair the memories afterwards as well. And so I feel like, like of the time you had that surgery or that procedure, ask yourself, were you at the end of your rope emotionally and just dying, pun intended, for help, or it was just kind of a routine procedure that you were okay emotionally?
So that's interesting. Oscar, sweetheart, you oh my gosh. He's not a small dog either. Oh God, I literally cannot put him down. I can't believe. So thank you so much, Ned and Andrew, for making this a spectacular conversation and discussion. I hope that many of you out there that are here with us today had many of your questions answered, or if not, I hope it provoked more thought. So thanks to you all for joining us today. This has been such a meaningful conversation, and I think what stands out most is that regardless of what we believe about near-death experiences, there's a common thread that keeps emerging. That's how we live matters. The way that we treat one another, the intentions we carry, the small moments we often overlook, all of this may hold more significance than we realize. And whether you see near-death experiencers as spiritual experiences, psychological events, or something that we don't yet fully understand, they invite us to ask better questions about our lives and about compassion, responsibility, and connection. So maybe the takeaway isn't about having all the answers, but about becoming a little bit more aware, a little more intentional, and a little more open to the impact we have on each other every day. Again, I want to thank Andrew and Ned for sharing their perspectives and insights, and thank all of you for showing up, listening, and contributing to this conversation.
Thank you for having us. I appreciate it.
My honor. I invite our viewers to share with others new insights today's discussions gave you, and include them in your conversations, your choices, and your daily life. Because if there's one thing that these experiences seem to suggest, it's that the way we live our lives may be the most important thing we create. And with that, we'll close for today. Thank you, and we'll see you next time on Souls on Tap. New insights.